Everybody, welcome to Topline, episode 78. We got a special one here. We're joined by, well, obviously it's me, Sam Jacobs. Asad's here, CEO of Sales Talent Agency. AJ's not here, but we're joined by none other than Benedict Evans. Benedict is one of the world's most famous internet analysts, and I don't know if you're going to dispute this, but futurist in terms of how.
No.
No. How would you just? And also, I came.
Futurist. I'm throw on this podcast.
You are. Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
This episode is brought to you by Bizzabo, the go-to solution for managing B2B conferences and events. Plan, promote, and produce events that engage your audience and drive revenue, all from one easy-to-use platform. Learn more at bizzabo.com. That's bizzabo.com.
How would you like to describe yourself? We're already into it. I love it.
So there's an old line from a New Yorker writer called A.J. Liebling who said that he could write better than anyone who wrote faster and faster than anyone who wrote better. And there's a sort of spectrum of different kinds of expertise and different ways of saying things. So there are people inside Apple or Google who know a lot more about the app market or the ad market or machine learning than I do. But they A, can't talk in public, and B, they aren't used to sort of building a structured story and working out how to explain things and how to pull things apart, because they're sort of right up at the coalface. And there are people who are very good at doing the nitty-gritty of this is how many units got sold each quarter, people like IDC and Gartner. There are people who are very good at working out what the next quarterly earnings are going to look like. There are people who are very good at, holding up a vision of where the world is going to change in 10 years, which is sort of what I would think of as futurism. And what I do is try and sit and think, okay, here is like a structural way of understanding what the important questions are, what they might mean, how to understand what's going on without having to know all of the technical detail, what is happening this year, next year, the year after next, at a certain level of abstraction around certain kinds of questions that matter in technology. And there's a sort of a Venn diagram within that because, there are many fields where there are interesting stuff happening, and within that there's a subset of stuff where I've sort of decided it would be a good use of my time to try and answer questions, and where there are people, there's the right useful audience for me to talk about that. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening in chips. I don't really know anything about chips, and not that many people are going to pay me I might not be able to say anything interesting or insightful about chips if I made the investment of becoming an expert, and no one's going to pay me to hear about that. Same thing, say, in like cars. There's all sorts of really interesting things happening in EV and autonomy and Chinese car makers. Mostly those are questions for car industry analysts. I could spend 6 months to get to the point that I know what a car analyst knows, and then I'd probably say the same thing. So I kind of look for, like, where is there a point of leverage where there are kind of big important structural shifts that I can explain something.
You left Andreessen a couple years ago. Is there any big change that you've noticed, or any impetus for that, being affiliated with a global asset manager and now being on your own, or was it more to maybe just maintain your independence and have an ability to opine without being necessarily tied to an investment thesis?
Oh, I mean, look, it's funny. I mean, I joined Andreessen Horowitz at the beginning of 2014, and I think they had 75 people, and I left at the end of 2019, which is now almost 5 years ago. And at that point, they had a couple of hundred, and I think they've now got like 600 or 700 people. And it's interesting you say asset manager. When I joined, it was 10x bigger than a typical VC. Now it's a lot bigger than a typical VC. And there's an interesting story there about the dynamics of the venture capital market, and what's going on there. No, frankly, I mean, I left because I'd spent 6 years in the Valley, and that was long enough, and I'd spent 6 years there, and I was instead of interested in doing something new. There's no particularly big story beyond that.
Cool. Good. Well, Asad is typically our moderator and our host. He prepared a bunch of questions. Asad, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. One of the things, Benedict, you talked about is AI, and we're excited to dig into this. So a question to maybe frame the conversation. You have this presentation on your website that you've been doing on AI. And it starts with this quote from Gates, which says that in my lifetime, I've seen 2 demonstrations of technology that have been struck me as revolutionary. One was the GUI and the other is ChatGPT. And I think he was speaking specifically to ChatGPT 4 when he spoke about it. And that awe and wonder that he is talking about is something many have felt. And since then, there's been tons of quantification around where's the world going? What is it going to look like? What's the future from here on out? And a point you made recently was that we don't really have a credible theory to be able to map out where this is going. We don't have a Moore's law of AI just yet. And I heard you on the Turpentine podcast last year, and they asked you, in a year from now, what are you going to be thinking about? Where do you think this is going? And you said, here are the things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about model cost. I'm thinking about error rates. I'm thinking about audit GPT, as well as if we go past this command bar-based UI to AI being implemented as part of workflows, to then be able to see where can this go. So to start with, it's been more than 12 months since that podcast. A lot of those things have played out based on what you've learned around those things, as well as things you have seen that were unexpected. How is this shaping your worldview, your near to medium worldview, specifically when it comes to its implication for businesses?
So I think this may be like 2 sort of fundamental questions, and then there's many second level questions. The sort of fundamental question is a science question, which is how far are these models going to scale? Are they going to get another 10x, 50x, 100x, 1000x better as we throw more compute and more data at them? And is there another 10x or 100x more data? Is there another 100x more compute? And how long would that take and what would that mean? And there are some people who think, look, we got to this point by scaling these models. We should presume we'll be able to, or at least imagine that we might be able to scale them again and keep scaling them. Mm-hmm. And so they will get, much, much better than they are now. And they may scale to the point purely from a software point of view that they might just be able to do like the whole thing. Like you could go to one of these models and say, look, just do my taxes, and it will ask you 4 or 5 questions and then give you a PDF. And file them. And then it will do that too. Or, pick your example. They might be able to scale to do like the whole thing. Or this is an S-curve and it will flat. Oh, and then there's like a minority of people who think it will go all the way to AGI or something beyond or superintelligence, which is a separate conversation. Then there's a bunch of people who think, well, clearly they're going to scale a bit, but, we should think of this as being sort of part of the normal path of history. And these things will flatten out, and then there'll be something else in the future. And this is like the world for the next 5-10 years is everything's about AI, but then there'll be something else. So like the conservative view is to say, this is another platform shift. It's like the web or the iPhone. And that's all it is. The aggressive view is to say, no, it's way more than that. And that's sort of the base question where we just don't know the answer. We don't have like a scientific theory that would tell us the answer to this. So we don't know. The other question is, what are these models useful for? Which is a very counterintuitive question, particularly if you're in the kind of the first camp that says, like, these things are amazing, they do everything. And there's sort of 2 analogies that I kind of turn around in my head. One of them is, remember when we saw the first wave of the last wave of machine learning 10 years ago, like image recognition starts working with ImageNet, and you show people demos of image recognition and they would say, well, that's very cool, but we're a bank. We don't have any images. Yeah. What would we do with this? And it took a while to work out that the right level of abstraction to understand this was pattern recognition. And then it took a while to work out, and then you think, right, well, obviously credit card fraud is pattern recognition. And, there's a whole bunch of things that are obviously pattern recognition or that you could turn into pattern recognition. But there's been wave after wave of companies since then saying, hey, we just realized this is pattern recognition. We just realized we just realized we could turn that into image recognition. And you've still got company after company being founded now that are doing that. And so, like, what is the right way to understand this? The other analogy that I think is interesting is to go back to the first software, sort of successful software spreadsheets back in the late 70s. Because like the young people today don't know this, like I didn't know this, but spreadsheets were paper. In fact, you can go on Amazon and you can still buy a pad of paper spreadsheet. And so Dan Brooklyn sees someone doing this on a blackboard at his MBA class and realizes you could do this in software. And so he makes an Apple II app and he shows this to accountants and they think, wait a minute, I type in the interest rate here and it changes the whole P&L forecast for the next 10 years. That's like a week of work.
Yeah.
I'd be sitting there with a pencil and paper and a calculator, filling in the numbers one after another. Like, that's a day of work, or that's a week of work. And you've done it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And there are, I think at the moment, 3 categories where people have that reaction to ChatGPT. And that is software developers, marketers, and customer support. Everyone else looks at it and thinks, okay, that's very clever, but I'm not quite sure what to do with this. And if you push a little bit further, you might be like the lawyer thinking, wait, I could do scheduling with this. I could do timesheets with this, maybe. And you realize, you push a little bit further and you realize, oh, maybe I do have use cases for this. But I think a lot of people have looked at this and thought, well, this is great, but so what? And so you see this in these sort of surveys of, something like sort of 40 to 60% of people in the developed world have now at least heard of this, and like 40% of them have used it. But only like 1, 2, 3% of people have turned into daily active users. So there were sort of numbers today or yesterday from OpenAI, where the New York Times got some numbers from them that they've got 350 million monthly active users, which is a lot, but 10 million paying users.
And super high churn, right?
And what is a monthly active user? Like, that's someone who uses it once a month. If this is supposed to be like the whole transformation of your life, monthly active user doesn't mean anything. I want to know the daily active users.
Yeah, multiple times a day, like using it consistently type of thing.
Yeah, and so that gets you to, there was another survey that I haven't got in front of me, which is like, this is something between like there's sort of very, very low single-digit percentage of time for people who are using it. And so we've got this moment of like, this is amazing. It's going to get much better. What's it useful? How much better? What's it useful for now? What will it be useful for in the future? Is it useful as a chatbot, or do we have to wrap it into use cases? Do we have to embed it inside software? Do we have to turn it into an API call and it's hidden inside things? And I'm going to conscious I'm a little monologuing here, but like there's sort of an example, like another example I think is really interesting is if you've installed the betas of macOS, the version of macOS or iOS that has a beta of Apple Intelligence, they have a feature called writing tools. So you can highlight text and say proofread, or rewrite to make more professional, or rewrite to make more friendly. So I was thinking about, well, how many OpenAI founders were there? What's happened to them all? And so like step 1 is open the web page. Step 2 is open Excel. Step 3 is copy and paste the names into a cell. Then go and Google each one of them. But wait, I can just highlight that paragraph in Safari, right click and hit make table. And it pops up, an Apple Intelligence pops up a table that I can copy and then paste into Excel.
What do you think but the point is that like that's spell check.
Yeah.
It's like in the 80s, spell check was a separate piece of software you had to buy for like $200. Now it's just part of what computers do. Of course, it checks your spelling. In the 80s, spell check was cheating. Like you could get in serious trouble at school if you used spell check.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it made mistakes. This was a big deal. Like, because you can't trust spell check because it might replace public with pubic or something. That was the classic one. And now, you can't use ChatGPT. It might make mistakes. Well, yeah, it might make mistakes. So you have to check it, but like you still use spell check. And so that's this question of, is this just like spell check? It just disappears inside stuff. And of course, software can do that now. Like, it's like image recognition. Like, of course your photo app can find pictures of your dog. That's not AI, that's your software. Or is it something different? Is this like a fundamental change in what you can do?
What do you think of what does the history of technology do you think imply about OpenAI's ability on a go forward basis to, maintain a moat to the point that you
What
made
mate?
that
What mate?
Yeah.
that's the question.
Well,
Fastest depreciating asset ever in history seems to be a model.
yeah. So, well, maybe an NFT. So, look, there was this memo from Google spring last year that says we have no moat, neither does OpenAI, and that's very clearly what happened. There might be a little bit of time, like you're 6 months ahead, but everyone's got the same data. The moat is capital. The moat is how many GPUs can you buy, how much data can you crunch, how many people can you acqui-hire. But there's no network effect here, at least not yet. There's no a priori reason why your product gets better because more people are using it, and that allows you to run away from everybody else, which is what, in a different world, is what Google Search has a network effect. Google Search is a reinforcement learning engine, and it gets better because it has more users, and it gets more users because it gets better. So it's a virtuous circle. There's no equivalent that we can. There's no obvious equivalent we can see yet for LLMs, and so today, Google and Meta. And maybe Alibaba and Anthropic are all sort of more or less at the same level as ChatGPT. And they announced a new thing and it's a bit better, but there's this kind of leapfrogging, and everybody's sort of roughly converged on the same point. Now, this also gets back to the scaling question, because what's sort of happened in the last 18 months is the models have got a bit better and a lot cheaper, but they've all sort of converged on the same point, which is sort of, pick your benchmark, 10, 20, 50% better than we were at a year ago. I'm not deliberately using in specific numbers. Like we are better than we were 18 months ago, but we're not like a generation better. And is that because we just need to spend, $1 squillion training models that are that are 10x bigger? Or is it, well, we kind of converge now? And the answer is, well, let's see what, because ChatGPT 4 was not much better than 3.5. I mean, it was, but it was not like enormously better. What is ChatGPT 5? Is ChatGPT 5? Is there enough data? How long does it take to build those data centers? How much data centers? How long will it take to even try the scaling experiment? Is it even possible to do the scaling experiment? Can we get 10x more data? Does synthetic data work? Work for what? Does it work outside of narrow domains? Does it work for everything? We don't know. But to your point, so far, no, Llama is pretty much as good as ChatGPT, and so is this Alibaba model, and so is Gemini, and they're all roughly the same.
Maybe habit is a moat, or brand, I guess. Maybe that would be the argument they're making if they're worth $150 billion.
But for $150 billion for your moat to be brand, that's really tricky, right?
Yeah. Now, if the answer is, look, we're going to be one of the 5 companies that do this, and there's enough for everybody, then maybe. But there's not sort of fundamental. And look, we've got Apple. Some networks, sometimes, in industries that do have a moat, the moat doesn't mean there's only one. So we have Android and Apple. In the smartphone market's big enough. And it may be that the barriers of scale mean that there will be 3 to 5 of these things.
Well, and then Asad, you can ask any question you want. But I was reading, I think it was last week's newsletter, or maybe this week, and you posted that article about McDonald's and how they found that when they put in kiosks, unsurprisingly, you commented, it didn't reduce labor. It pushed the labor, I guess you could call it, to more like experiential functions, but it was like instead of, and it also dramatically increased the level of complexity of the ordering, because now everybody's customizing everything, and they're getting
and
a
it's
bunch
much easier to upsell, and it's easier to market,
and so
pushing your minimum wage cashier to try and upsell.
Right, exactly. But to your point, it didn't mean that they fired the minimum wage cashier. It meant that now the cashier walks the food to the table or does some other kind of, restaurant maintenance procedure. And there's obviously tons and tons of companies, many of whom are thinking, how do we employ AI and, this concept of AI agents in the right way? Mm-hmm. And there's lots of knowledge workers that are saying, well, how will this impact me? And I guess if I'm extending the corollary, but I love your perspective, there's always people that are saying this particular technology will wipe out this many jobs and it won't create any new jobs in its place. Is the point sort of that you're alluding to that, no, we should expect more job creation. Companies are going to invest more in growth. Any operational efficiency that comes from implementing any kind of machine learning, AI, whatever, is the same kind as any technology. That doesn't sap their appetite for growth. That means they'll reinvest, and maybe it pushes sort of middle tier knowledge workers to what you might think of as service or support functions, because that create like differentiated experiences. Like the guy on the United flight is more accommodating and more endearing because everything else about checking your bag and everything else is taken care of by technology. That's not really a question. It's sort of, to your point, a monologue, but what's your reaction to that?
So I think, look, there's a joke I made about this, that young people of today won't believe this, but before Excel, junior investment bankers worked really long hours, and now thanks to spreadsheets, Goldman Sachs associates can get their work done by lunchtime on Friday and go off to the Hamptons for the weekend. And of course, that's not what happened at all. And the economist's term for this is Jevons paradox. Jevons was an economist in Britain in the 19th century, and Britain was made of coal. Britain was basically the Saudi Arabia of the 19th century, which has all sorts of interesting second-order effects. And the Royal Navy runs on coal, and the Royal Navy is not only the biggest in the world, but it's bigger than the next two navies in the world combined. Literally, that was how it was funded. It would be bigger than the next two navies in the world combined.
Wow.
And so what happens if we run out of coal? Like, big question. When we run out of coal, big question. And so some people say, well, look, steam engines are getting way more efficient, so our coal consumption will go down, so don't worry about it. And Jevons says, no, if the steam engines get more efficient, then it's cheaper to use coal, so we'll use more coal, not less.
Right.
Which is basically price elasticity in action. If you make it cheaper to do something, do you do the same thing for less money, or do you do more for the same money? And the answer is, well, it kind of depends on what you're doing. And there's this sort of fascinating analysis of what the steam engines did. It's like the amount of motive power, like measured in horses. Like, how many horse equivalents did steam engines create? How many man equivalents did steam engines create? And the answer is like hundreds of thousands or millions. There's another great observation just tangentially, which is one of these things that are like blindingly obvious when you say it, but it would never have occurred to you. The observation is, as I was reading this thing about why you should buy a car instead of a horse, and the answer, and one of the bullet points is, you don't need to feed a car when you're not driving it. And you're like, oh, yes. Like, when you go away for the week and you leave the car in the barn, you don't need to keep feeding it. It's like there should be like a German word for this, or something that's a course once you say it. And so the point is, like, there will be fields where, one of the, we said earlier, what's the right level of abstraction to understand this? One of the right levels of possibilities for a level of abstraction to understand this lets you automate a whole class of stuff that you couldn't automate before. So will you do more of it, or will you do the same for less? And the answer is, it depends. Now, go back to spreadsheets. I went and pulled data on like how many people are employed as accountants in the US, and the number went up. Spreadsheets did not result in a decrease in the number of CPAs. CPAs went up.
The other part of that is how long it takes technology to become mainstream. So I grew up in Pakistan, and those spreadsheets on paper that you're talking about, I grew up in the 90s, were still being used over there in the 90s, right? Even in the early 2000s within the government. And so technology takes a while to disperse, and use cases take a while. The powerful, defendable use case takes a while to come up. But now what we've seen recently in the last couple of weeks is these enterprise software companies, Salesforce, ServiceNow, even HubSpot, they've basically, Mark Benioff called it a hard pivot towards AI agents. They're really hanging their hats on these AI agents. And it sounds cool. Basically, technology that can take a complex problem, reason its way through it, use multiple tools to get something done for you. And with that, Salesforce claims we have a big advantage because all these enterprises have their workflows across sales, marketing, services, customer success mapped out. We have the data, we have the context, and that's going to make these agents really powerful. But on the flip side, the argument can be, well, that we have to then assume that Salesforce is going to write some amazing code, and maybe these companies are past the point where they write amazing code. there's the innovator's dilemma, and instead the advantage is with a startup, or there's this do-it-yourself AI thing going on with Klarna, etc. The question I have is, it feels early in the cycle for the main use case to become mainstream. But the way that these companies have come out of the gate with it, with the intensity and strength of their tone over here, they're saying this is it. What are your thoughts on AI agents for enterprise level adoption? Like, are we there yet? Like, the error rates are still pretty high. Like, how is this so ready for mainstream?
So, typical, sort of useful data here is there's a good study from Bain where, sort of half to 3/4 of companies have got a pilot or experiment. It's a study by function. So it's programming, law, marketing, HR, accounting, etc., across different functions of the company. And in sort of software development, like 75% of people have got a pilot and 50% of people have got something in production. Over in law, it's like 10% and 5%. And so in the last 18 months, every big company has done a bunch of pilots. So if you do a survey that says, how many big companies are using generative AI? The answer is 100%. Does the CEO, but all that tells you is, does the CEO have a ChatGPT account? It's like the daily active user question. What do you mean by daily? What do you mean by people who use? Have you used ChatGPT? Yes. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything other than brand awareness.
Yeah.
Has that made its way into production? Much less. And one of the things you have to understand here is, like, it takes 18 months to build a piece of enterprise software.
Yeah.
And it takes 18 months for a company to buy it, and it takes 18 months for them to deploy it. And none of this stuff existed.
And that's if you're fast. 18 months to buy is like if you're moving quick there.
Yeah, I mean, this was the stupidity of the whole Duma thing, that we need to pause AI development for 6 months. You really don't understand how long it takes for software to get deployed, never mind built. This is, my joke, but we're safe from AGI because, Google actually has an AGI already, but it's spent the last 9 months trying to get onboarded to Google so it can buy more compute. There's some guy in an Indian call center who keeps insisting on, I need to know your mother's middle name. So, it takes a while. And none of that, the fact that doesn't really tell us anything about the validity of the use cases. It just tells us, look, it's only been 2 years. When did the OpenAI API launch? It was 18 months ago. Right? So of course we don't have massive scale enterprise software deployment yet. It takes a while. I think another answer would be, it's back to this: is the prompt the UI? And I think almost always no. I think you need to instantiate this in software and UI and go to market and tooling and auditing and everything else. Like, why is there a ChatGPT API? Well, because if ChatGPT could do the whole thing, you wouldn't need an API.
Yeah.
And of course it can't. So, you need the API.
That's right.
So, and then the question becomes, well, what do you do with it? And there's like a kind of classic, as I'm a consultant, sometimes everything is 3 bullet points. And so bullet point 1 is, it's spell checking, it's data validation, it's marginal cost saving, it's automation. It will save you a few points of margin, and all your competitors will do it too. And so that will get, in a competitive industry, that will get competed away to the bottom line. It's just more automation. And so it's bottom line innovation. And in the software industry, this is the equivalent, is like the incumbents make it a feature. So, Adobe adds generative fill to Photoshop. That's not a new company that kills Adobe. That's just a feature in Photoshop. Apple and Google and Microsoft add, auto summarize to text. That's not a new company. That's just spell check. The second case is here is a new capability, or here a new feature or new way of building a product, which is let's rebuild Siri. Or, let's build this entirely new function that you couldn't really do before. But it's still basically part of the existing product set and part of the existing competitive environment. And then the third scenario is, no, this is the entry point for a new competitor. And this really changes what the market is, which is always the thing that's hard to predict. So, if you think of an example from the past, imagine it's 1997 and we're doing a strategy session on what does the internet mean for hotels. So we would say, well, we'll have, clearly travel agents have an existential problem. And we're going to do online travel booking. We'll do online booking, and we'll let you check your loyalty online. Did they have loyalty then? I don't know. But we'll let you check your loyalty balance online. And this is cost saving and process saving, and you don't need to have people on the front desk answering the phone. So this saves you money. And if you're Hilton, you do this, and Marriott does it, and that's it. Step two is this creates price transparency and fluidity, and it creates a whole new world of online booking. And maybe we need to give all of our money to Booking.com or Google in order to get booked. So maybe this changes stuff around how our business works. And maybe now we have online loyalty points, and we do cross-sells with the airlines, and we have way more of our booking come through Booking with our partnership with the airline and points. So there's stuff that changes how your business works. I don't know anything about the hotel business. So if you know something in the hotel business, I apologize for you just screaming at the, podcast. I was probably just talking total nonsense. But the point is, the stuff that's just easy, obvious, straightforward cost saving, it doesn't really change anything about your business. The stuff that does change how you do business a bit, but it still fits within the constraints of the existing competitive environment. And then there's Airbnb, which actually changes what it means to say hotel. And that's a bit that's hard or impossible to predict in advance, because if you could have predicted that, you'd have started Airbnb. I mean, I think there's a and you can do all of these sort of a priori kind of top-down models of where is this going to change stuff. Which are like Goldman's did a thing of which industries have low labor productivity, because then you're trying to find industries that look like they've got lots of grunts doing boring grunt work, but you might be able to automate. And you can do that up to a point. And so but again, imagine it's 1997. That wouldn't have told you about Airbnb. It would have told you that travel agents had a problem. It wouldn't have told you Airbnb.
Are there historical examples of companies in the past during a platform shift doing what Salesforce and ServiceNow are doing, where they're saying the main use case is here, this is what it is, they're betting the farm on it, but they're very early in the cycle, and it seems like they might be under market-based pressure forcing them to do this to try and protect their business. Are there examples of things like this happening in the past with other incumbents from yesteryear?
Well, so the incumbents always try and make it a feature. And so the challenge is this a feature? So go back to the iPhone, and Nokia and BlackBerry say, well, we can do multi-touch, and they can. The challenge is that the point of the iPhone isn't really the multi-touch. It's the fact that the iPhone is not another phone, but with multi-touch. It's a small Mac. And that's why it's impossible or so difficult for the incumbents to compete, because they have to not just add another. It's not about having multi-touch and sliding your finger and having pinch to zoom. It's the operating system that enables that, and the operating system that enables the ecosystem of apps, and having the developer tools and everything else. Where building a developer ecosystem is not the same as let's add multi-touch to our existing touchscreen phone. Go back a little bit further, newspapers look at the internet. There's a sort of a joke that newspapers looked at the internet and thought that this would be great because they'll save on their printing bills, and of course the printing bills go down. Yes, but the problem is that newspapers think of the thought of themselves as expertise, recommendation, discovery, journalism, authority, comment, the fourth estate, etc., etc., etc. But they're also like manufacturing companies and trucking companies. And it's the light manufacturing and trucking that's a barrier to competition. The problem with all of these is this is all obvious in hindsight. I mean, there's a famous story in Herodotus that King Croesus of Lydia, somewhere in what's now Turkey, goes to the oracle at Delphi and says, "Should I invade Persia?" And the oracle says, "If you invade Persia, you'll destroy a great kingdom." And he thinks, "Great," and of course forgets to ask, "Well, which kingdom are we talking about here?" And he invades, and of course, it's his kingdom that's destroyed. And this is kind of the problem with all of these sorts of innovation frameworks. Is they're all obvious in hindsight. Well, of course, BlackBerry was screwed. Of course, Kodak was screwed. Of course, newspapers were screwed. And sometimes, you can say it was obvious at the time. But sometimes the new thing really is just a feature.
Do you? One of the things that we've seen recently, or it's Asad and I's hypothesis, I guess, is that because the cost of starting a new company seems to be falling, given AI, given automation, given offshore support, but also on the other side, given that it feels harder because the cost of creating a new company and a competitor is lower, there are more competitors, and the ability for any one company to become $1 billion, a $10 billion, the opportunity for new startups seems, at least from our perspective, and maybe it's just informed by the last couple of years of economics, but that the opportunity for new startups seems lower than, at least in B2B tech. And for us, what we've been talking about is the pressure that puts on effectively, Series A, what you might call growth stage investors, where if they're going to deploy 25, 30, 40, $50 million and need to get some kind of 10x or 20x return on that, that's problematic given the way that B2B economics work, and given that maybe the valuations, we saw a lot of companies, and again, we spend our time in B2B tech and SaaS, and so we saw a lot of companies that, are now at $150 or $200 million in revenue, but had raised at $8, $9, $10 billion and are effectively really only worth $1 billion, if that, and many of them have hit a wall in terms of growth. And it sort of seems to be a big red flag that, there's probably still opportunity if you're a seed stage investor, if you're very early, because there's lots of opportunity to create 30, 40, $50 million businesses, but there's not that many opportunities to create $500 or $600 million businesses. And that seems to be a problem if people raised a bunch of money to deploy to write $30 or $40 million checks. What do you think?
Okay, so I think there's actually three slightly different things within this. The first is that valuations got out of hand in 2020, 2021. And there's a bunch of people that raised at far too high valuation and now need to kind of take their medicine. And that's really a VC venture capital mechanics, startup market mechanic, valuation market mechanic question. It doesn't really have anything to do with your ability to create a company of a certain size. It's just that you raised far too much money, too high valuation. You're not going to be able to grow into that at today's multiples. There's a second short-term question, which is that for VCs, it's kind of tricky to work out what a generative AI startup would be. In that you've either got billions of dollars, you're either raising billions of dollars to build a foundation model, and most VCs don't have billions of dollars to write, can't write $1 billion checks. VCs write, some people can, but like most VCs write, don't have the kind of money to invest in Anthropic or Mistral or something. So you're either building a foundation model and it's billions of dollars, or this was the line this time last year, you're a thin GPT wrapper. You're basically wrapping APIs in some UI and some go-to-market, and you might get screwed as the model gets better or they change the APIs. And either way, you don't control the underlying fundamental platform, so other people can build stuff. The challenge with that is that it's got a bit more clear over the last year what models are going to be able to do. I mean, subject to everything we said earlier about we don't know what the models are going to be, but as we are today, we kind of get what the models are going to be able to do. And nobody looks at a SaaS application today and says, well, they're just a thin AWS wrapper. They're just a thin GCP wrapper. If what you're doing is selling data processing or data storage or image recognition, then yes, of course you're going to get screwed by the hyperscalers, because of course that's a hyperscaler product. But if what you're building is, instead of go back to the last wave of machine learning, there's two companies I always used to talk about at A16Z. One of them is Everlaw, which is a cloud platform for legal discovery. So you're a lawyer, you see somebody, they send you 3 trucks full of paper. What do? You can immediately imagine the kind of stuff that lawyers would want with that. So they can't buy an AWS storage API. They also can't buy an image recognition API. Now machine learning comes along, so now you can do translation and you can do pattern recognition, you can do clustering, you can say, find me angry emails. You can say, find me weird emails, find me emails like this. Again, they're not going to buy the AWS pattern recognition API or the clustering API or the sentiment analysis. They need that wrapped in product with go-to-market and support and 20 things that only legal software people know that you even need. I mean, you can guess what some of them might be, but you can imagine there's a bunch of stuff in there that you don't know. That law firm, that global law firm, cannot buy a translation API. They need a whole bunch of other stuff on top of that. Now, will Everlaw work? Fine. Will it compete with? Are they worried about competition from Microsoft? Maybe. Are they worried about competition from AWS? No. And so that's the question of how much abstraction are you building on top in the go-to-market, the UI, the workflow. And this kind of comes back to the chatbot as command line point. That what a UI is doing is it's two things. It's like at a very kind of conceptual level, it's showing the user what you could do. So you don't need to memorize all these keyboard commands. Well, no, it's three things. Firstly, it's showing the user how to do the thing you already want to do without having to memorize the keyboard command. Secondly, it's showing you all the things that you could do that you didn't know you could do.
Yeah.
Because there's just a button for that.
Yeah.
But thirdly, it's telling the software what to do. So what a UI is doing is it's documenting the workflows and possibilities that you want. Not so much for something like Excel, but for Salesforce, you are documenting the workflows and tasks and data collection needs that you have as a business. And you're instantiating that in UI and then presenting that to the user. So you're telling the UI user, this is how our company works. And you're telling the software, this is how our company works. And so if you go to an agent and you say, like, please get in touch with this customer and try and sell them this product, it's going to have to work it out from first principles, from scratch. Which is kind of like if you said that to an intern, that's not what you said. You wouldn't tell an intern to do that. Mm-hmm. Not like that, anyway.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you might sit down with them for 20 minutes and talk them through what you want to do, and then you check their work and you go back and forth. But you wouldn't just like say, hey, intern, just go and fix the sales process. And you can't go to an agent and say, hey, agent, just go fix the sales process. That's not actually an intelligence problem. It's like a context, description, instruction, workflow kind of problem. All of which is to say, like, there are today, typical big company today uses 400 to 500 SaaS apps. And all of those are doing something that you could in principle do in email or Salesforce or Excel.
Yes.
Or Oracle.
Carter,
so why is it
manage your cap table on a Google Sheet?
Yeah, but you don't. Why?
Yeah.
There was a kind of taking this to the extreme. There was a story in the summer that one of the Formula One's teams was managing all of the components for a Formula One car using an Excel spreadsheet. There's 20,000 components in this car. And anyone at Microsoft would be like, no, don't do that. Get a database. It's like, yeah, you could do that. That would not be a good idea. And so all of this is to say, like, yeah, there's going to be a lot more software here. There's going to be a lot of softwares in which people use this as an entry point to unbundle something out of Salesforce or solve some problem that's done in Salesforce but in a much better way, or find some problem that no one even really knew was a problem that you can now do using LLMs and take it to market with a SaaS app, because of course it will be SaaS. And SaaS enabled those 400 apps because it's just a much better route to market. You don't need to get onto the wait list. Yeah. Well, it's not so much that. It's like you don't need to persuade the CIO to put this onto the deployment plan for the enterprise data center for 2026. Mm-hmm. You can it's just a website and a credit card. And then, yes, you need, then of course you need authentication, verification, and single sign-on.
Think about
all that.
Price.
But in principle, that's why you've got 400 apps. Because it's just a better route to market. Now, LLMs aren't necessarily a better route to market, but they will again enable you to unbundle all of these new use cases and identify all of these use cases where you didn't even have a tool before.
Do you think about pricing models like how with cloud SaaS became the primary pricing model? Do you think about usage, consumption, those type of pricing models having a chance of becoming more mainstream now?
So I think there's a sort of a basic problem, and it comes back to these sort of science questions we were talking about at the beginning. There's a sort of basic problem in that LLMs have marginal cost. Mm-hmm. Now, and we're not like the consumer internet. Most of us weren't born, or certainly weren't working the last time that a software company that you had marginal cost every time the user pressed OK.
Press enter, yeah.
Yes, press enter, that has marginal cost. Like that's mainframe territory or time-saving territory.
It's so crazy.
But the whole premise of the consumer internet is that it doesn't cost, you don't have marginal cost. And so Instagram could get to whatever it was, 50 million users without any revenue. Because, I mean, yes, it was costing them money, but not enough money that they couldn't do that. YouTube had real marginal cost, but like a typical consumer internet company has sufficiently low marginal cost that you don't need to get revenue straight away. And with an LLM, at least in the last year or two, you did. So you couldn't just make it free and then make it up later. Or if you were doing that, you open AI with 350 million MAUs and 10 million paying users, yes, you need to go out and raise another $6 billion. So now that is changing in that the inference cost has come down, depending on who you talk to, anything between like 75 and 95%. That's most of that is just because this was a science project and OpenAI didn't have any users, so who cares what the inference cost is? And now you apply data center engineers to this, and the cost comes down massively, and the models get more efficient, but also you apply the engineers to it. So that's like maybe a short-term question. Of course, if the models get 10x bigger, they may get more expensive again. Like with these kind of moving parts of the models, can we make the models bigger and better and more capable? Can we also make them smaller and cheaper? Better and faster and cheaper at the same time, please. So where will we be on this in 2 years? I don't know. I think from an enterprise software point of view, obviously this looks very different, because if you're charging $100 a seat or $1,000 a seat, for something that has that marginal cost equation looks very different from if you're trying to making $1 a month from the user for advertising. But will this change the pricing model overall? Like, I don't know. Maybe. I don't have a view on that. Depends on the application.
I think we're coming up to time, and that's a good place to leave it, because then we can have you back in a while and talk about where did we land up with this pricing model thing. This has been fascinating, Benedict. Thank you for making time in your busy calendar and pontificating with us. It was fascinating to read and listen to all the stuff you've done over the last couple of years to think through what to discuss today, and then to actually break those things down with you. It's been great.
And we'll see you. You're coming to Austin, Texas in 2 weeks to speak at our conference. So thanks so much for doing that.
I am, yes. I'm flying in and out.
Well, we look forward to seeing you in person. Thanks a lot for your time.
Are you coming to GTM 2024 in Austin, Texas? It's going to happen October 14th to 16th. I'm Kim Scott, and I wrote Radical Candor and Radical Respect. At GTM 2024, I'm going to be diving into how you can solicit feedback. It'll give you the opportunity to read minds. How you can give both praise and criticism, and how you can gauge how what you are saying is landing and make corrections so that you can have better conversations. Whether you're looking to improve your relationships at work or improve your results at work, this session will equip you with the strategies to excel in 2025. So don't wait. Get your ticket before they sell out. You can get it at joinpavilion.com/GTM 2024. And as a thank you for being a Topline listener, you will receive an extra 15% off your ticket with the code Topline. See you in Austin.
Well, that was our episode. What a great conversation with Benedict Evans. Don't you think, Asad?
Fascinating, fantastic conversation. I think it's interesting to talk to people like Benedict, because he is trying to be extremely realistic about the world. Sometimes it tilts towards a little bit of a pessimistic view of where we are and where we're going. And he might be right. Listen, pessimists are right once in a while, but I think you and I and a lot of the listeners here are, I think, more optimists by nature. And so you look at the signals and you try to extrapolate and say, what's the bull case for all of this? And I think there is a really interesting and exciting bull case out there. I also think that history rhymes rather than completely repeats. And so just because things took a certain amount of time before or played out a certain way before, there's no certainty that that's exactly how it's going to happen in the future. And I think it's just important to remember those things. It's important to look back, but it's not giving you a complete map of where the future is. There's a lot of unknowns that we need to figure out as we go.
There's the unknown. There's a series of things. There's first of all, there's the
Oh,
unknowns, but then there's the known unknowns, but then there's the unknown unknowns.
those are the wild ones. What are you gonna do about those?
You little devils, you little unknown, you use.
When Donald Rumsfeld said that, I remember watching it and being like, what is he saying? This is the wildest thing he's ever
He
said.
was a very interesting person.
He was a very interesting person. That
Bush was-
time was a very interesting time, like the Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld era. They were big in Pakistan because Bush was really close to the dictator who ran Pakistan at the time. I don't know how we got here.
Were you a big fan of Bush?
I kind of found him hilarious, but that was it. Like we found it funny. Our president at the time was this army general who I'm distantly related to, who had taken over the country in 1999, and they developed a real close friendship based on a threat. So Bush had said, "You're either with us or you're against us." After 9/11,
Pervez Musharraf.
Musharraf, yeah.
Huh.
And I was a big Musharraf fan. I really
You
liked.
were.
Yeah,
He
I
was
was
good.
huge. I met him a bunch of times. He's a distant relative of mine. Like, I really liked him. I remember from all the times I've lived in Pakistan, the best time was during his era. And so there was something there, but they were close and they had a funny relationship. And so that was my impression of Bush.
Well, there we go. Shout out to Pervez Musharraf.
He died.
Oh, sorry. Rest in peace.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that's your shout out and win of the week.
My win of the week. My shout out. My shout out. You don't get me thrown in jail if I go to Pakistan. My win of the week was our dictator died. Solitary confinement for 20 years.
And my shout out and win of the week is to I don't know, Pat Mahomes. So good.
Sam, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, sure.
A non-shout out question. Let me ask you. We have a few minutes.
We're wrapping up here though.
What's your bull case for all these things that you're noticing today in terms of AI and like the early signals? And then you're in the community business. You're in the business of bringing people together and trying to equip and enable them to be great professionals. Do you feel like this is a moment that is very exciting because of all the ways that you can support human beings to thrive more? Or are you more worried about the future of the professional? Just like on that spectrum, where are you falling today?
Well, my partner sometimes says, "How hungry are you?" And I say, "Medium." And that's pretty much my answer 100% of the time. So what do I mean by that? So much of politics is local and so much of human experience is relevant to whatever happened to you personally. And in my company, we are doing we're moving into the early stages of a deployment phase for AI. There are AI enabled operational workflows throughout Pavilion, and they are only increasing.
Wow.
We have a help bot in Slack that answers all of our support questions, but it will soon be able to index and archive the entirety of all of Slack conversations, and you'll be able to ask it, what's the most popular SDR platform or sales engagement platform, and it'll give you a plausible answer. It might not be the best answer, but it'll give you an answer. We are, enriching information, and there's all of this, the big thing is like person level, anonymized person level intent data, right? So like somebody is in market, but never, and it's a person, not a company. And there's companies like Todd Abbott, who used to be CEO of Insight Squared, who's a member of our Miami chapter, who's building a company called Deliver.ai, which is like our B2B, but not just on website. It's, like doing searches around the internet, and that surfaces back to people that are paying for access to that information. There's all this data enrichment that's happening. There's, like a really cool use case. And again, yes, they do sponsor me, but nevertheless, right? So let me tell you a really cool use case for Otter. So Otter records, my Otter pilot comes into all of my calls now, and there's an LLM, that they built that's inside the Otter platform. So I log in, and it's recorded pretty much all of my conversations over the last month. Not every one, and I ask it, what are the top 3 challenges facing Pavilion? And then I ask it, what are the 5 biggest risks that we will face in executing our plan next year? And then I ask it, what's the number one big opportunity? And it synthesizes all the conversations that I've had across all the different executives and all the different members, and it pulls out and it says, here's the 3 big opportunities. And they was deadly accurate. And I said, what's the biggest opportunity I have for professional development in terms of how I run a meeting? And it gives me the answer to that.
That's
Right. So
interesting.
yeah, it's cool. It's
That's
cool. So like I
really
said, like
cool.
this isn't just bells and whistles. This isn't just like
Yeah.
make a podcast. This is deployment. This is like actual workflows that are driving efficiency that enable me to do stuff that I wasn't able to do before. So that leads me to a great sense of optimism. And to the point that we've discussed before, people, I don't think, want to pocket profits. I think people want to grow fundamentally. And I think they want to reinvest it into growth. So that's the bull case. And the bear case is, what we talked about, growth equity stage businesses series B, C, D, companies that are struggling under the weight of, hey, 20 million ARR used to get you $500 million valuation. Well, if you raised at that, now you're worth 80 million, especially if growth has slowed. Now, 80 million might be great if your last valuation was 50 million, but if your last valuation was $500 million, it's deeply problematic. And you're going to have to you're just so far, just the level of pain, the ongoing level of pain is still here, and I'm seeing it in other places as well. So I'm seeing it in companies that are saying, we would love to sponsor GTM, but we don't think we're going to be able to raise another round. So we need to cut every expense until we get to efficiency and get to break even and profitability. So that's the bear case. The bear case is still legacy costs. There's been enough movement, enough people like you and me and AJ and other companies that have figured out a way to grow in this market and that have cut costs and become disciplined. But that doesn't make it easy. The degree of difficulty is still quite high, and the growth expectations have to be tempered. And, to the point of profitable, efficient growth, we might be in a world of 15 to 20% top line growth, but 15% EBITDA margins, and that's not as valuable to the point that growth is worth more than profit. That's not as valuable as 60% or 40 the rule of 40, this misnomer, 40% top line growth and break even is worth way, way more than 20% top line growth, 20% profit margin. So I think it all comes down to price. If your company is priced at a point where you feel motivated and excited to make money, and Pavilion, candidly, is priced probably just at that point. It's priced at the point where there's bears and bulls. Where if you don't like me and you're annoyed by me and you think I wrote a stupid book and I wasn't a nice person to you one time and I'm too authoritarian or doctrinaire on LinkedIn.
Have you heard these things?
Yeah, recently. You think I'm a jerk? Then yeah, there's a bear case on Pavilion. Of course there is. Slow grower, doesn't matter, they're profitable underwater. On the other hand, like I have growth opportunities that I'm aware of. The business fundamentally is structurally sound and growing. We're growing along the lines of a rule of 40 business with the mix that I said was less valuable versus more valuable. And I have time because I don't, because there's no redemption rights on their securities on my investors. And if it takes me 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'm okay with that. And so that's my bull case, so like we're in this period where it's exciting, to your point, Asad, because it's about execution.
Yeah.
It's not just interest rates, anymore.
I think, you said this to me, I don't know if it was on a pod or somewhere else, but we're coming out. I almost feel like when we look back many years down the line, we will appreciate having gone through 2022 and 2023 because I think it made us harder as people and better. And I think the world that we're entering now, or have already entered, and it's going to play out, is one where, sure, the cost of capital comes down, but I think there will be many more challenges that require solving than opportunities because of cheap capital. I think competition will be intense. AI will create an interesting dynamic for people. And I think it's going to be up to the execution of leaders and their teams to make that an advantage for them or a disadvantage. And I feel like having gone through this really painful period and having grown because of it in terms of our temperament as well as skill set, will equip a lot more people to be able to navigate this next period than if we had entered it after 2021. I think we would have squandered a lot of opportunities and taken on undue risk and just less finessed with how we operated, and that would have put existential risk on many businesses. So I feel like we'll all appreciate this 2 years of pain that we went through.
Well, I think it's the markets. It's the invisible hand. The ones that don't appreciate it will go on to their next thing. Some people that were CEOs weren't meant to be CEOs. Some people that thought that they were great VPs of sales should have been strategic account executives. Some people that thought they were great VPs of sales were great VPs of sales and are kicking butt. Some people, the degree of difficulty went up, and Kyle Norton and other people like him stepped up and became great CROs. It's what is it? It's a weighing machine, in the long term, the markets, as opposed to a voting machine.
It's kind of beautiful.
Thanks for listening to our episode. We this recap, this end point for the Benedict Evans episode really had very little to do with Benedict Evans, but we do appreciate that he came on the pod. Thank you very much. We hope you got to see him speak at GTM 2024. The talk was AI and everything else. It was really great. And thanks for listening to Topline, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.